again, I had that very similar feeling that I mentioned about having an AA school where I felt like I feel like I should just know how to do this already.
Welcome to the Awakened Anesthetist podcast, the first podcast to highlight the CAA experience. I'm your host, Mary Jean, and I've been a certified anesthesiologist assistant for close to 2 decades. Throughout my journey and struggles, I've searched for guidance that includes my unique perspective as a CAA. At one of my lowest points, I decided to turn my passion for storytelling and my belief that the CAA profession is uniquely able to create a life by design into a podcast. If you are a practicing CAA, current AA student, or someone who hopes to be one, I encourage you to stick around and experience the power of being in a community filled with voices who sound like yours, sharing experiences you never believed possible. I know you will find yourself here at the Awakened Anesthetist podcast. Welcome in. Welcome, everyone, to Season 4 of the Awakened Anesthetist podcast. I'm really excited to have Sarah Brown, who you may have heard of because she just did something really big and important for certified anesthesiologist assistants, and we're here today to talk about it. And I'm just really excited to bring another season of process episodes to our community to really give an example of what it means to use the CAA profession to live a life by design rather than default. And Sarah is another prime example of that. So let me go ahead and give you the timeout and the logistics behind Sarah before we jump into our episode. Sarah is a 2011 Emory grad. She, after graduation, worked full-time in Georgia, in Gainesville, and then in Atlanta. And then she took a big move and moved across the country to the state of Washington, where she pursued another degree and is currently working as a therapist in Washington, and then worked really hard as the president of the Washington Academy of Anesthesiologist Assistants, and just passed the legislation for CAAs to work in that state in 2024. So I'm excited to give you all a lot more details and to meet Sarah and hear her incredible journey. So I just wanted to welcome you, Sarah, to the Awakened Anesthetist podcast.
Thank you. Thanks, Mary Jean. Happy to be here.
I know. This is an exciting opening episode, and I hope every season I open the season with another state passing, and maybe so many states passing that I can't interview everyone.
Yeah.
So, so I love to start with a rapid fire round. It really scratches a nosy itch for me, and here I just think it's fun to hear who you are and how it relates to who I am as well, and maybe the listeners.
Okay, let's do it.
I don't know why this question is so interesting to me, but what time do you go to bed? What time do you get up?
Oh, geez.
Give details.
Well, I'm a mother of 2 young children, so pretty much by the time they go to bed, I am not too far behind them. So I would say by 9 each night, I'm pretty much done for the day. And then I'm waking up usually around 7. So it's a good long stretch considering that I have, 2 little.
Good for you. I feel like that's an absolute feat because you have a newborn or a few months old, correct?
Yeah, she's 4 months old.
4 months old, yes. So you're doing great. Awesome.
Yeah. Not too bad, huh?
When you're waking up at 7, are you drinking a cup of coffee or are you a tea person?
Oh, coffee for sure. Yeah. Yeah, I do like fresh grounds and pour over usually. Also have a Nespresso. So usually one of those 2 or both.
And you live in Washington, so it's kind of like you can't not be into coffee, I feel like.
For sure. Yeah. Or make a run with the kids to a coffee shop. That's fun too.
Yes. What's something that never gets old?
Surfing.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Surfing is one of those things I feel like I could do forever. I never get tired of it when I'm out there. Not that I get to do it a ton living like in the inland Northwest, but when I have the opportunity, I could do it all day long. If the sun weren't beating down on me. That's the rate limiting factor there. But
Yeah.
otherwise, never gets old.
Yeah. Very interesting. I have, of course, like 1,000 more questions I'd love to ask you, but maybe another time.
Sure.
Tell me about growing up and what it was like to be you, maybe the culture you grew up in or the environment and how that shaped you.
Well, I grew up in Georgia, so in the South, and I grew up in a town called Gainesville, Georgia, just about an hour north of Atlanta. And I grew up with two older brothers and parents still married. And my parents actually both grew up in Gainesville too. And their parents grew up in Gainesville. So it is a very like old Southern family that's been in the same town forever. So I'm really, in my family, at least the first person to leave Georgia. My family was, we're like middle class. And, I was listening to Lindsay's episode recently and how she talked about growing up with family who was always like education driven. My family was similar, but it was really medically education driven. So that was always just what I assumed I would do. Didn't hurt that I was good at it and gifted in math and science too. So, I grew up, my dad was a pharmacist. My grandfather was a surgeon. My uncle's a surgeon. Lots of cousins and things like that were in the medical field as well. My brother is an AA also. So yeah, it's just kind of, the path that I assumed I would take and didn't really know anything different. And my parents are still in Gainesville today.
Wow.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just so interested to hear how you moved away from just all that stability and like what drove you. So I'm excited to get there. When did you first hear about the CAA profession? Were you thinking you were going to go to medical school and then this fell into your lap or because of your brother?
Yeah, I definitely just heard about it first from my brother. He was a few years ahead of me in age and school and everything. So actually, it's funny. Me and both my older brothers all like were thinking about pharmacy school while we were in college because my dad was a pharmacist. Pharmacy school is extremely competitive, mainly because there aren't very many pharmacy schools, especially like in Georgia. Like it's a small class size. There's not a lot, so it's pretty competitive. I knew that going into it, but probably around like my sophomore year is when my brother entered AA school. And so that quickly shifted for me because I learned of the program and he really talked it up. And I did some shadowing of a family friend who's an anesthesiologist and was like, okay, this is probably a better fit for me.
Mm-hmm. And what at that age made it seem like a better fit over maybe pharmacy school and feeling like your chances were as good? Are there more pharmacy schools than AA schools, or is it there's more AA schools than pharmacy schools?
Yeah, I was thinking better fit. I just enjoyed it more. I didn't love being behind the counter. I grew up seeing my dad as a pharmacist and worked as a pharmacy tech through high school and college. And I love the flexibility of like not having a traditional 9 to 5 and kind of being able to do it part time and, imagining my future and thinking that would be a good fit for me. But I did not love being behind that counter all day. And I wanted something a bit more dynamic. So when I started shadowing and learning about anesthesia, I was like, okay, your day is not like Groundhog Day. You're gonna have you can have a very different day every day of the week. So that was much more appealing to me, as well as the potential to work full time, part time, and have the flexibility for a lifestyle that I wanted.
Mm-hmm. I just think it's interesting your perspective on what it means to be a CAA because you were growing up in the hub of CAAs. Like, I think that's interesting that you're like, oh, one day I could work part-time as a CAA. And for me, I grew up in Cleveland, Ohio, which was another hub, but I just never saw anyone working part-time. Like, I feel like that's a newer phenomenon that you and I both have got to enjoy at different times. So And I just think
Sure.
that is true. Like it is true now that you can work part-time or have a flexible shift or something, but that's evolved, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Very interesting. Okay, so for all of the prospective AAs who are listening or people who are currently in AA school and are needing a little bit of, they want to relate to you, I would love for you to share how AA school was for you, the good, the bad, what you remember, what you blocked out.
Oh, geez. Yeah, let me take myself back there. It's been about 13 years now. So, well, 15 years since I started. Um, it was it was a time that felt like here's what I remember. I remember starting AA school and feeling like I should already know everything there is to know about anesthesia. And I don't know if that was just my own internal like expectations of myself or if that was the preceptors that I had and all of that, but it's probably a combination of both.
Mm,
But I remember feeling very overwhelmed by that. And like starting day one, I'm like, I'm already behind, you know? And when I look back on that now, I'm like, that is so silly. I was literally there to learn this. And so I felt pretty overwhelmed at times and having to like remind myself, like, I've only been doing this for a month. I've only been doing this for 6 months. Like, this is the point of anesthesia school is to learn and to not feel like I need to know it all already. Um, so I would say that was probably the more challenging aspect of it to me, like the hours, the long hours, all of that. That was okay. Like I didn't necessarily mind that. That fits my, personality
mhm,
pretty well. Um, I had a lot of fun too. Was really good friends with a few of my classmates and we had long study sessions and, stay up late, drink a lot of coffee. Like I loved traveling second year and doing the rotations, especially when I got to do it with good friends.
mhm,
So I have really fond memories of that part of it and seeing myself develop and flourish and kind of coming into my own. Yeah, I think that if I could give some advice to my younger self and to potentially to some SAAs listening, would be to go a bit easier on yourself with your expectations and remember that you're here to learn. So ask the questions, even if you feel like they're dumb questions, because this is your opportunity to do that and to learn the way that you like to practice, learn best practices, and to absorb that information without having to, you know, posture in some way that you
mm,
are um, not kind of in the dark and
mhm,
you're not a little bit confused and lost at times. So,
mhm. It is such a delicate balance, man. It
mhm.
is just it's tricky. It's a tricky way to learn. Learning medicine, I mean, medical students go through this, residents go through this, that you're in the real life non-simulation learning. It's very tricky. So
Mhm.
that's great advice. And I hear a few people who are listening screaming, ask her when it clicked. Like, when did you feel like, oh, okay, now I have it? At what point in your education?
Hmm.
As a hope. Maybe this is a hope
Yeah.
for them
Yeah.
listening.
It definitely was not until second year. I would say that first time that I could run an entire case start to finish without without needing to like look behind me to my preceptor to be like, "Are you happy with what I'm doing? Am I doing the right thing?" That feeling that we all have of like, let me read your face to
Yeah.
like see if I'm doing it right or if I'm going to get the look of like, what are you doing? um,
Oh, the look. Yeah.
the look of just like, oh man, these students, I think for me, having that confidence of like, I don't need to look behind me. I know what I'm doing
Hmm.
is best for this patient. It's the right thing to be doing at the right time. And I know that I do have eyes on this situation right now. So I'm not going to get into anything dangerous or out of line. But for me, that felt really empowering to be like, okay, I don't really need the backup mentally. emotionally or whatever, to affirm that I am doing right by my patient. So that for me was like getting a few of those under my belt. I was like, okay, I actually can do this.
Mm-hmm.
So definitely sometime second year, I would say halfway through, somewhere around in there. Yeah.
Yeah, that sounds about right. Yeah, and I just think if you're in AA school right now, you know exactly what you're talking about. So I think they'll find that helpful. Great. Walk us through maybe just immediately post graduation and you stayed in Georgia for a while. Maybe fast forward us through what made you leave Georgia and go to Washington.
So yeah, after practicing in Georgia full time for 4 or 5 years, I was at a point in my life where I kind of got an itch to try something different. And not that I wasn't happy with my profession as an AA, but I thought, this is the opportunity before I have too many roots to explore a different interest of mine. And so I felt for a long time, actually, a real interest in mental health therapy. And I did a few like trainings on the side, similar to what I hear you, do
Mm-hmm.
like little
Yeah.
trainings here and there and gathering these skills and resources. And I did that for a while. One of the trainings that I did was in Seattle. And I flew out a few times a year to an organization called the Allender Center and did some trainings with them and kind of just felt like, whoa, this is really something that I want to pursue. And so they have a master's program as well. And so I decided to put a pause on my full-time job in Georgia and kind of uproot my whole life and move to Seattle to pursue this. And honestly, when I started, I was like, I'm going to give it one semester, like, let me just see. I had a great working environment in Georgia. I was working at Atlanta Medical Center, had a fantastic group and boss I talked to him about all this. I was like, I need to have a few things like safety nets lined up for me to feel like I can do this.
Yeah.
I said, one is that I need to know I can come back to my job and when I was expecting to come back when I decide that I'm ready to come back. And he was like, yeah, just say the word, like, we'll have you back. And I was like, two, I need to be able to continue to work PRN. And can I do that here? And he was like, great, love it. Like, whenever you want to come. So it was honestly just hard to say no to at that point because I had that safety net and I felt really free to try something knowing I could come back. And so with his support, really, I felt like, let me go and try this. So I did. I moved to Seattle. And those first 2 weeks, I was like, I'm not going to make it. I'm not going to do this. I'm going back. It felt so, or really an identity shift, that occurred. But, I stuck it out. And that was almost 10 years ago, nearly 10 years ago. So I continued to work PRN at that hospital until it closed a couple years ago. So
Uh, I just, I love this. I just think this is exactly what gets me so excited about the CAA profession and how to use it as a tool. I want to know more about the safety piece because that is so real. And that I think is one of the strongest aspects of the CAA profession, that it really can give you safety. And I would love if you could be blunt about what that exactly meant in terms of finances or that job, like being able to come back to the job, and who this manager was this a anesthesiologist, was this a CAA, who was this person who was so willing to work with you?
so he was an anesthesiologist and his name was Dr. Harris. And he was the one who I had those conversations with. He was sort of the chief of the group at the time. Yeah, we just always had a really great working relationship. I felt he really had my back multiple times, not just on this issue, but a lot of issues. He just really went to bat for me. And I imagine other AAs and CRNAs as well that were in our group. So in my opinion, he was a fantastic boss to work for. And looking back clearly on my story, he's a big part of why I felt free to pursue more of who I wanted to be. So yeah, that type of leadership is hard to come by, even when he didn't necessarily understand or wasn't his thing that he would have chosen.
Mm-hmm.
He could see that that's what I needed and kind of set the stage for me to have that environment to come back to, that group to come back to for the next, 8 years, 7 or 8 years that I continued to fly back and forth from Seattle to Atlanta to work the weekends. Yeah.
Every weekend, or what were you trying to hit, like a monetary goal, or were they like, here are the days you could work, and so you had to make that work?
It was a monetary goal for sure. It was basically enough just to ensure that I didn't have to work in Seattle. Like a lot of
Gotcha.
my classmates, in grad school were working at Starbucks and stuff like
Mm-hmm.
that. So I just didn't want to have to do anything like that. And so I made
Gotcha.
enough money to pay my rent, have money for food. And of course, I had some savings that I was using to pay for school and, that I could dip
Mm-hmm.
into and stuff. So that was part of it. I wanted to work at least one weekend a month, which is what I did for a very long time. Sometimes 2 weekends a month. Christmas break, summer breaks, things like that. When I wasn't in school, I would come back for longer periods and work 2 weeks, 3 weeks a month. It was a really easy, ideal situation for me.
Oh my goodness. I just see so many people who are CAAs right now thinking like, oh my goodness, I've never thought maybe I could sort of do it this way and then also maybe pursue this other side thing I want or this other next thing I want. And for all the students listening, I these opportunities still exist. This wasn't like a thing that happened in 2014? Was that when we're kind of talking about this?
Yeah, 2015 is when I moved to Seattle. So yeah. And that went on for, like I said, until Atlanta Medical closed in 2022.
Yeah, I'm doing something similar to pursue new things for myself as well, working PRN and basically get to pick the days I want to work in Kansas City, at a big hospital, and sort of use it as support, financial support, as well as stability in terms of like, okay, if this new thing doesn't fly, I can always come back to working as a CAA, which I love too, which is a nice perk. It's not something I don't want to do.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Exactly. And that's very similar to, and to answer your question about safety and
Mm-hmm.
and all of that, that was a big part of it for me, was that the CA profession is lucrative and it's very hard work at times. But I felt after working several years full time, full call, I felt I was really good at it. I had that sense of like, I feel pretty confident about what I'm doing. And always there's
Mm-hmm.
room to grow, always there's room to, improve. But I think that was part of the safety that I knew, like, I'm not getting out of this too early. I'm not like, going PRN or whatever too soon. I felt like coming back once a weekend or once a month or twice a month, for a few shifts each time,
Mm-hmm.
kept my skills up. It kept me, engaged in the job enough. And I had that strong few years of like really coming into my own and developing my skills and knowledge and confidence as a provider to step away from it and know that coming back wouldn't be too intimidating. So there was that piece of it and the financial piece of like, it's really risky after having a very well paying, comfortable job to say, I'm going to step away from that. Most people don't do
Mm-hmm.
that. And I got all sorts of sideways looks from family, from friends, from colleagues about like, why would you do that? And it's no secret that mental health therapists make significantly less than AAs. So it was never a like purely financial choice for me to do this. It
Mm-hmm.
was like, I wanted to be really authentic to myself. And I knew that I had more of my life that I wanted to develop and explore. But like I live in reality, I needed to, know that I had some safety net of job to come back to that could pay the bills if it came to that. And which is in part, we'll get into this, I'm sure, but why I was really passionate about bringing AAs to Washington too. So that I didn't have to travel across the country anymore,
Yeah.
and they're very personal for me, as well as, to develop and help the profession and the patients of Washington. But truly driving it was a personal desire of like, I don't want to have to sacrifice any part of myself. And, having two kids now, it just got in Atlanta Medical Center closing. It just got more and more difficult for me to have that sense of safety and security to go back to. So I had to get creative and create it here. So,
Mm-hmm. And the journey began. I just love that, Sarah. I'm just really proud of you as a fellow CAA. I just really love the bravery that it took to do that and the authenticity. Following your authenticity it just gets me all excited. So I hope people feel inspired as well when they hear that story. And yeah, let's get into the Washington legislative process, because absolutely that is something we're celebrating on this episode. I think the first question I want you to answer is just, we know a little bit about your why and the passion behind it, but how did you logistically get into making a difference in the CAA legislation in Washington?
So when I was working one of these PRN shifts in Atlanta Medical Center, I was working with an old colleague of mine who I worked with in a different hospital in Georgia. He was also working PRN that day. And he was Ralph DePaw, and he was on the board of Quad A at the time. And he was like, "Hey, you're living in Washington, right?" He's like, "Would you be interested in starting a state academy there?" And I was like, "I don't really know what that means, but sure, how hard
Famous
could it
last
be?
words.
How hard could it be?" And he was like, I later found out that the WSSA, the Washington State Society of Anesthesiologists, was hoping to introduce AA legislation, and they contacted Quad A to let them know. And so Quad A said, "Well, we're going to need, some boots on the ground in Washington as, an AA, like, who do we have?" And, there aren't many of us out here. So I was kind of the obvious choice there, I think. That's kind of how I was pursued about it. And a lot had already been going on behind the scenes as far as the WSSA and their lobbying team getting a bill going.
And what year was this? What year did you start the State Component Society?
2021.
2021. Okay, so very recent, honestly. The bill passed in 2024, and you had started the State Academy for Certified Anesthesiologist Assistants in Washington in 2021. And unbeknownst to you, just kind of piecing this together, if I'm hearing you correctly, there was a lot of movement behind the scenes that you kind of were plugged into when you said, "Sure, I can start the State Component Society. Yeah, why not?" And then you were like, "Oh, okay."
Yeah.
Okay, so I think it probably will be helpful for everyone who's listening. If you don't know about how a CAA bill or an AA bill is passed in a state, it can be confusing. And I only learned about this last year when I talked so in depth to Nevada. And so I do want people to walk away from this episode with like a really grounded understanding of what an AA bill passing looks like in terms of the steps. And I also want to say it's a little bit different in every state. So it's not something that is absolutely 100% applicable state to state, but give us just a basic overview, if you could, of the legislative process in the state of Washington.
Okay. So every year there's a legislative session, and the session is this period of time, usually a couple of 2 or 3 months, where that is the time of year where bills are heard and voted on. So that doesn't happen year round. That happens during specific times called the session. And so a lot of work is done in between sessions to actually get the bill to the point where it's being heard in the session. And so that had already been going on behind the scenes. And so when I kind of came on a lot of those conversations with legislators were already happening. The bill had already been drafted, and they were working on what's called a sunrise review, which is not unique to Washington, but I don't know that it happens in every state. And that is when the Department of Health studies a profession, a new profession, or maybe they study a specific part of a profession that there's legislation about. At any rate, that sunrise review is very extensive and had already been going on too. So by the time I came onto the scene, the bill was being introduced in the 2021 session, and the sunrise review had been done and was completed, and they had given their recommendation to license AAs in Washington. So
may I interject for a moment?
Sure. Yeah.
Can you just explain who was doing all of that work? If it wasn't you and it wasn't the Quad A, who was that?
That was mostly the lobbyist for the WSSA, the Washington State Society of Anesthesiologists. And they hire a lobbyist to help work with legislators to draft the bill, to get the sunrise review going. And that's why we have lobbyists, because we're like anesthesia providers. We don't know what needs to be done. So they hired their own lobbyist to follow all these rules, follow all these steps, and get a bill introduced. And so that was already up and running by the time I came on. Then what happens during session is that your bill is first introduced either to the Senate committee or House committee, which is, you have two branches of the legislature, the House, the Senate, and then within those branches, there's subcommittees, little committees that meet for things like finances or healthcare or infrastructure, all those types of issues. And so our bill was heard in the healthcare committee. And that first year, it didn't get out of committee, meaning that it wasn't voted on. It didn't pass the committee. So, but what will happen with a bill, and what eventually happened with our bill, is that it's heard in the committee. Then it goes technically to a rules committee, so another committee after the first committee. And then it goes to the whole one side of the legislature. So either the House or the Senate, wherever the bill was introduced. And then if you get to that third step, it goes back to the other side of the legislature into a committee, into another committee, and then to the whole of that group. And along the way, there's usually amendments happening to a bill. And every time an amendment happens, it has to go back to the other side to be voted on as well. So, I mean, it is extremely extensive, the amount of times that your bill has to be voted on and that you have to stress out about it not getting passed out of this committee. So there's a lot of steps involved. And then eventually, if it gets through all of that, then it's put on the governor's desk for his signature, which is the final thing that has to happen. So yeah, quite extensive process and extremely stressful at times.
Yes, I can imagine. And so many out of your hand moments, like where you're just waiting for a phone call, I imagine, or an email to say it passed, it didn't pass, and here's our next steps.
Yes. Well, I was not necessarily waiting on a phone call to see if it passed or not, because I was either present physically or watching on Zoom every committee and every meeting that was had. The only ones I couldn't be a part of were the rules, because those are in-house. They're closed and not open to the public. But yeah, I was always watching. I was always tuning in live. So yeah, I was not sitting around waiting on a phone call. I was
You were there. Yes.
I was there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow.
So yeah, there's a lot happening in between each of those times too, because we get little snippets of information from our lobbyist, which is why she's there on the Olympia Capitol having conversations. And we're involved in a lot of those conversations too. And we get information like, this legislator has an issue with this part of the bill. This legislator has an issue with this part of the bill. We have to meet with them and help educate, there's some compromise that goes on. That's where the amendments come in. There's just like so many fine-tuned little tweaks that happen behind the scenes to finally get the bill to where you get enough votes for it to pass. So it's extremely complicated.
And it was attempted in 2022, in 2023, and then it passed in 2024. How many hours do you think each week you put into this for 3 solid years? I mean, I know you did work before that as well, but like when it was trying to be passed.
It's hard to say, honestly, because during the session, it was pretty much around the clock.
Wow.
I didn't probably have to be that involved, but I needed to be for my own, that's just my way of being. But I made myself more involved than I probably needed to be. And I think my lobbyist at times was like, let me just handle it, especially when the baby was coming. She's like, take a break. I've got this, but I'm like, what's going on? I need to know everything. So during the session, it was around the clock this year. In the summer, in between, very little. I mean, I would do an email here or there. I would, do a post or something if I needed some support in that way. Met with legislators, occasionally in the downtime. But during the session, things happen so quickly that if you wait 10 minutes to reply to an email, it could be very different.
Wow.
Yeah, it was very fast paced this year in particular. Yeah.
In 2024, the year that it passed. Wow.
Mm-hmm. Something we did this year, we actually did it in 2023, but it was for the 24 session. And it was at the request of the legislators, was that we participated in what's called stakeholders meetings for the bill. And so this was an opportunity in that the legislators, they don't like to see, they didn't like the contentiousness of the bill. So there was a lot of, we want this, and nobody could get on the same page. And so they suggested, and what often happens are stakeholders meetings. And so we participated in these meetings with the WANA, which is the Washington Association of Nurse Anesthetists, and the WSSA, and legislators and their staff were present. And so we had a series of stakeholders meetings leading up to session 2 to discuss the bill and to try to get on the same page about what would happen with the bill. And so I'm not sure if that happens in every state or not, but just to give a little bit more insight into this year, what it took to get the bill across the finish line was kind of coming to the table with the WANA, with the WSSA, and making sure that everyone had a voice and that these conversations were happening in real time in front of the legislators. What often happens, and was frustrating in the process, is that we would meet, like the WSSA and the Washington Academy would meet with legislators, and we would kind of give them our pitch. And then 2 weeks would go by and they would hear another pitch from the WANA. And they have so many bills that they're hearing and so much going on that they can't remember what was said 2 weeks ago. All they can probably remember is what they're being told right now, and it can get really confusing for them and a lot of information. And so we found it very helpful to have those conversations real time in front of the legislators so that they could ask questions of all groups involved, of all the stakeholders, and we could all provide our responses in real time. And so that took up a good bit of time and emotional energy and preparation as well this year.
Thank you for sharing that, because oftentimes AAs come in as like information givers as opposed to like a contentious party. You know what I mean? Like, I just think our position seems to be, we're not here to fight. We're just here to solve this problem. And I just think it's hard to have that type of attitude when the other side is possibly being contentious 2 weeks after the legislators talk to us.
Yeah, it is. It is hard because we don't have the upper hand, right? We're not practicing in this state. We don't have a lot of constituents in this state. So we have to, in some ways, tread lightly because we don't have, there's not a robust understanding of our profession. And so we have to come in with a lot of education and a lot of defending inaccurate representations of our profession. And so definitely tricky to do without coming across as contentious, which we don't want to be. But at the same time, not letting a different narrative run away. Like we definitely wanted to be in control of the narrative of AAs because we are the experts on AAs. We are the AAs, and we needed to be in control of that narrative so that we weren't chasing our tails trying to readdress misinformation, but we could get the correct information out there ahead of anyone else's. So,
do you think the process of re-educating, is that what you felt like you were doing most of the time?
yes.
Wow.
That's most of the conversations. If it were only us presenting the information, of course, I think any legislator would be like, oh, okay, this makes a lot of sense,
Yeah.
But when you have different groups speaking to our profession about what they understand it to be or what they've heard it to be and how it impacts them, how they imagine it will impact them, there's a lot of just honestly false statements being made, not speaking to anyone's intention to speak falsely or to lie, but that just ended up being what it was, is that there was legislators would hear things and we would be like, that's actually not true, So there was a lot of cleanup work that had to happen the first couple of years. I think this last year we were very much more proactive in getting out our information before others had the opportunity to get out their interpretation of our profession, so that we had to kind of come behind and clean that up. That's a lot of what we do, is having the same conversation over and over and redirecting legislators back to a different conversation that we want to have, not about how this will tear apart another profession, but how it will actually be good for the patients of Washington.
How did you get comfortable speaking to legislators or speaking in this stakeholder meeting? Like, did you practice? Like, did you have someone in your life ask you questions? Like, what were you actually doing to prepare?
Oh, great question. Well, by the time I was in these meetings, I had been doing this for a few years, but I do remember the first time kind of starting the academy and we were getting everything formed. And again, I had that very similar feeling that I mentioned about having an AA school, where I felt like I feel like I should just know how to do this already, because everyone around me, even the AAs around me who had been involved in the legislative process that I consulted with, had a language. It was like learning a second language. And they were already speaking the language and they felt very confident in what they were saying and doing. And I was like, had that very familiar feeling of like, I think I should already know this, apparently. I should know how to do this. I should know this information. Even just someone saying, oh, the academy, or oh, the society, or the session, or whatever. I'm like, wait, what's the session again? What's the society again? What are we talking about? Like the very simple terms. I had to ask so many questions and remember that, like, I've never done this before. That's why it feels hard, because it is hard. I remember meeting with Richard Evans, who was the director of government affairs at the time, and for Quad A, and he was like, oh, when we start meeting with legislators, you'll blah, 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 blah. And I won't ever forget that, because I was like, wait, we're going to be meeting with legislators? I'm going to? No, 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 no. I thought that's what you were for. I thought you were for that, not me. And so it felt extremely intimidating at the time. I came to learn that legislators actually really just want you to be a regular person and leave the technical, lobbying, political conversations up to the lobbyist, which thank God we had a lobbyist, because I could just be an AA. I could just be myself. I could just tell my story and kind of ask those questions that reveal very quickly to anyone that I'm not a politician. I'm not in this world, And that actually felt really relieving to me. I didn't have to be a politician. I didn't have to be a lobbyist. I could just be an AA and tell my story and ask those questions that, everybody else is like, already knows the answer to, but I don't, and that's okay. Um, the way I prepared was just really over time. The first meeting that I had with a legislator was here in Spokane, which is where I live now, Spokane, Washington. And we met at a hotel restaurant, and the WSSA lobbyist flew over from the west side of the state and met with me and this representative out here. And I don't think I said very much at all.
Uh-huh.
I think I was just like, I don't know what's happening. I was pretty nervous. Over the years, I got much more comfortable talking and just, speaking up a bit more. And yeah, it took some time. I had a lot of tremendous support from the Quad A, from folks who have done this before me and coaching me, especially during testimony time in the session, about what to say, how to say it, to make it concise and understandable, and how to boil things down to be a bit more easily understood by politicians who have a lot on their plate and aren't medical experts usually. So there is a lot of just learning by observing and by doing it, repetition.
I'm so inspired by hearing this. Like it's really encouraging as like, a regular CAA who I consider myself to be, to hear another regular CAA say that they're just looking to hear your story. They're just looking to find the humanity within you and connect with that and be like, oh, okay, I can see why she wants CAAs to work in this state because she's commuting by flight to Atlanta and she has a family here in Washington, wants to stay there. All of that makes sense to them more so. I think I get worried that like, oh, if I was ever called to do this, I'd have to use these expert terms and like wow them with my understanding of the state legislation and the laws. And that's not at all what you're saying. That does maybe happen in some ways that lobbyists are doing or other people. And maybe you grew into incorporating a little bit of that language, but at the basis, it was just, who are you? Who is Sarah? And share that.
Yes.
Oh my gosh, that is so inspiring.
Yeah, it was a huge relief to realize like, oh, I don't have to be a part of this political group and, speak their language. Like it was definitely helpful for me to understand what was going on. But yeah, my lobbyist was always like, just tell your story. Let me handle all of the politics of it, and that is exactly what we needed because you have to have someone talking the politics for bills to get passed, but it does not have to be you. Someone who, and they want to talk to the lobbyists. They want to have those conversations with the lobbyists because they have a shared language. They would much rather have those conversations with lobbyists than with us. So it was a win-win for everybody.
And just if you're listening right now and you're not sure what a lobbyist is, there is another episode that was actually the season 3 opener where I interviewed several people who worked to pass the Nevada AA bill. And in that episode, we talk a lot about the lobbyists and how the lobbyists are hired and who pays them and what their exact role is. So after you're done listening to this, if you want to have a little bit more knowledge and just hear the legislative process again at the state level, I will put that link in the show notes, and it would be really, really helpful to listen right after this. Okay, of the many, many, many more things I want to ask you, one of the biggest moments, at least for us watching on the outside, because you're also running all the social media for the Washington Academy of Anesthesiologist Assistants, which is how I met you and know about all of these goings on, is that the bill took a turn in 2024. It looked like it was going to go to the governor's desk and be signed in and celebrate and yay. And then about 2 weeks before, it all seemed to fall apart, possibly. And I would love if you could share what you can about the behind the scenes of leading up to that happening, and then the bill actually being signed this year.
Yeah. So when the bill passed the legislature, which means that it got through all of those committees and both chambers that I mentioned, the final step was for it to go to the governor's desk. And our lobbyist was in contact with the governor's office, and they said, this seems like a bill the governor would sign. We don't anticipate any issues with it. I mean, he doesn't have a really high veto record, so it just would seem really out of the ordinary for that to happen. And so we felt really confident. And I'm not sure that we ever really had a reason not to feel confident, and I'll explain that later, but we started to not feel confident a few weeks after the bill got out of the legislature. So it passed the legislature. We're thinking, great, the governor's on board, shouldn't be a problem. I think there was about a month, if I'm not mistaken, about a month-long period, the governor had to sign all of the bills. And we're talking hundreds of bills that he has to sign. So, a couple weeks went by and we're like, lobbyist was like, it's okay that the bill hasn't been signed yet. We still got time. Then like another week went by and we're like starting to get a little bit worried, like what's he thinking? Because the office wouldn't really give us many details on what he was thinking. Then we heard that it was scheduled to be signed, and we were like, awesome, like great. And then about an hour after it was posted to be signed, because the agenda is posted publicly to the governor's website, the agenda changed, and the governor's office called our lobbying team and the legislators and said that bill has been removed. And we didn't know why, if it would be added back, if he was not going to sign it. We didn't know what he was thinking.
Like reconsider the whole bill after speaking to who knows who about who knows what. But something changed his mind because he's the last step, or the governor is the last step to getting a bill passed into law at the state level, correct?
Yes.
Okay.
And he has the power to veto the bill. So just kind of more or less wipe out everything that we just did for the last 3 years.
Yeah. Oh my God.
So, yeah. And it's one person, it's one vote. So like versus the legislature where it's like, well, if this one person doesn't want to vote for it, that's fine. We can get other votes in this way. It's one vote at this point. So it's like, if he doesn't want it, then it doesn't happen. And I don't think that was ever actually the case for him. I don't think that he was ever like, I'm reconsidering it. I just think that someone like kind of put a flag on it for him. And he was like, okay, well, I need to look at this a bit further. Whereas before, he's kind of briefed on the bills, his staff informs, I think, a lot of like what happens, and it's a bit of a team effort. And I think that's why we were getting the information initially that his staff was like, this is something he's likely to support, expanding access to healthcare. Of course, this is in line with his values and all of that. So, and then his office went essentially radio silent for the next week. And we didn't hear any updates, even though we were asking. And in the meantime, we were trying to garner a lot of support across the country to have folks call in and email into the governor's office, which you probably remember seeing all of those posts, like call the governor, call the governor, email the governor.
Yes.
And I think he just probably got tired of, and him and his office probably got tired of hearing from both sides so much. I think he had to go radio silent to just block it all out and say, let me focus on the bill. Let me focus on the facts. And then the night before he signed the bill, which was his very last day signing any bill that session.
Oh, gosh.
And he's not running for re-election. So it was his very last bill signing ever. The night before, we got a phone call. It's on the agenda for tomorrow.
Wow.
And so I hopped a plane for Seattle. I wanted to be there, me and my family, even though I had just given birth 4 days or 5 days previous.
5 days before.
Yeah.
I was seeing this all go down on Instagram. I'm like, this woman, Sarah, I could not believe what you had just endured while having a baby. Like you didn't know if he was going to sign it or not, right? While you were like delivering this baby. It was all just so up in the air.
No, I was, and I will, it was so intertwined. I call them both of my babies.
Yeah.
The bill and my daughter, They were so intertwined that like even during labor, I was like thinking about this stupid bill. I was like, this is insane. Why am I thinking about this right now? Um, but yeah, the Bill baby was born 5 days later. And so I got to be there for the
Yeah.
signing, and so cool as a mom to have
Yeah.
both of my kids there, but especially my daughter there, holding her and getting to one day tell her about what, us strong women can do in the world and the impact that we can have. That was like the best week of my life so far.
Bet.
It's going to be a hard one to
Oh
top.
my
So,
gosh. Wow, amazing. I have
yeah.
so many more questions for you, but in the interest of time, maybe a couple more. Because I do think people are going to hear your story and think, okay, well, I want my home state to open, or I want to have this opportunity to move XYZ. And I just never thought it's possible. But now I think maybe it's possible. So I think there's kind of two groups of people. The first is a CAA or an SAA who knows they want to open a new state and they have that passion and drive. And maybe it's their home state. What is their first step to take?
I think their first step would be to, if you're not already a member of Quad A, become a member of the Quad A. I am ashamed to admit, but I think it's important for people to know that after a couple years of working full time, and, I was a Quad A member right out of school, but I let my membership lapse. And especially then going PRN where I didn't have my group paying for professional memberships, I wasn't a member anymore for a long time. And it wasn't until they approached me to start the academy that they were like, by the way, you need to be a Quad A member to do this. And I was like, oh, of course, like happy to, but that's even how I got re-involved with the Quad A. And now I'm also the subcommittee chair on the Quad A. And so I'm, just more and more involved, and have come back to a realization after a long time of being away from it, how important this professional organization is. So I would say become a member of the Quad A and reach out to our legislative chair, Bree Siegford, that I'm interested. I'm from the state. I have connections in the state. Express your desire, because there may be someone from the state society in that state also contacting Quad A saying, hey, I'm in this state and I want to do it. And we can, join forces and start to create a little army of people who are motivated
Yeah.
to get this done. So
Okay.
that would be the first step.
Awesome. Beautiful. Everyone's taking that and going now. The second group of people I would love for you to speak directly to are those maybe that I fall into, where I'm enthusiastic about the profession spreading, but I don't know that I have the passion or the desire to open up a whole new state. It's not a personal investment for me at this time in my life. How can I or those people make a difference?
There's two big buckets of the ways that you can be involved. One is with your time, even if it's just a little bit of time, and one is with your money. So I'll start with the money piece first. Donating to the legislative fund for Quad A, or donating directly to a state academy that you feel personally interested in, is profoundly important and useful. The lobbyist that I mentioned, like pretty much all of our funding comes from the Quad A legislative fund to hire her. And then we have a little bit that comes in from people donating directly to the Washington Academy. But every penny that we receive goes toward the lobbyist. So donating your money, if you're like, hey, I can't even like be bothered to write an email or phone call at this point, like totally get it. Give some money. That would be great. The second, and what I found really to be so crucial, was when you see a post or when you see an email come from Quad A about, we need you to sign this form, we need you to email, we need you to call. Those take like very little time, 5 minutes or less usually, and are so helpful. So if you see those types of opportunities, even if you feel like, I don't know what to say in an email, you can usually ask someone, or you can just I will just tell you, it's usually just about sharing your story. My name is so and so. This is where I live. I'm an AA. Please vote yes for this bill to expand healthcare in this state. That it's a really simple and easy message. And so anytime you see the opportunity to do that, I will just say, personally, that type of response helped me so much when I'm all the way out here on this side of the country and I feel really disconnected at times from the larger AA community, to know that I could put a post out there or have Quad A send out an email and that there would be a large response from people actually following through with this was everything. And we needed that because there are 1,000 CRNAs in Washington state. And for every CRNA in the state, they have family, they have friends that they can reach out to that are constituents calling in. And so we needed to show, like, we may not be in Washington state yet, but we're out here and, we care about what's going on too. And we would love the opportunity to come and work in that state and have our tax dollars in that state and have our families in that state and plant roots there. And so that type of opportunity, when you see it come along, it's really easy to do, super low commitment, and means the world to the people who have the boots on the ground doing the work. And it goes a long way with legislators as well.
So good. Yes, yes, yes. That's everything I was hoping you would say. And I just want to reiterate a theme that's come up just from me talking to people who I'm like, whoa, I'm talking to Sarah who passed the CAA bill in Washington. I'm talking to the Quad A president, to really see it is by you, Sarah, sitting in Washington attempting to pass this bill that my email coming from Kansas City, Missouri hits you, you see it, and you're like, okay, people care. And okay, this $50 came in and I'm going to use that now to pay the lobbyist this month, which is the only way that this is going to happen. Like, that gets in my brain like, oh, this is only one step away from me. This is not 100, circles away from me where people are doing this. This is just one small step and I can really make a difference. It's inspiring as a CAA to know that one person can make such a huge difference. And it also can feel pretty daunting. And I think holding both those truths is sort of, the beauty of being a CAA right now. So
it's just a CAA who is choosing to do something or who is choosing not to. So that's the only difference. There's no superheroes. There's no someone who's more qualified or less qualified. It's really just the person who decides to show up and do it. So
yes, yes, yes. What is next on the horizon for you? What's next in your life by design, Sarah?
Well, I feel like I'm getting closer and closer to my dream of being able to do both jobs that I love here in the state. So now that the bill has been passed, we've entered the licensure portion of the process. So we're working with the Medical Commission right now, the Washington Academy, as well as the WSSA, to finalize the license that will eventually be the license of AAs. And so that's a lengthy process as well. It's the government. Nothing's like extremely fast. So we're looking at still quite a few months, up to a year out from that being done. That's my hope and my dream of what is on the horizon for me, is to be able to practice in this state, to work, and exciting to share that we already have groups in the state interested in hiring us. And I'm in contact with those groups and working with them to make sure that they are ready to go when the licenses are ready and have their ducks in a row and ready to accept AAs into their practice.
Amazing. Well, I can't wait to catch up with you in a year, and you can maybe help share how after the legislative process comes the licensure process, and then comes the hospital accreditation process, and then comes the hiring process, which are all steps to get you where you want to go. And I would love to check back in a year and just see where everything's at. What do I want everyone to know? I want them to know that in the show notes, I'm going to put a link to donate directly to the Washington Academy of Anesthesiologist Assistants, who needs your support right now to help them push through that licensure process. Correct? That takes money.
Yes.
So we're going to put that in the show notes. I'm going to put a link to email Bree Siegfried, who is the current chair of the Quad A Legislative Committee. if you are listening and you're like, I don't really care that much about Washington. Sorry, Sarah, we love you, but I care about something else, or, I want to do something, you can email Bree. And then the Quad A Legislative Fund is an ongoing fund that is large. And each year, the state component societies, let's get in the weeds to it slightly because we're talking to CAAs, the state component societies of CAAs put in a request to this legislative fund to be doled out money. And that money is oftentimes used for the lobbyists. And so, yeah, it all just really matters. And you're just one step away from making a huge difference as a CAA. So I really encourage everyone to check out those links. I'll also put the Nevada episode in the show notes so that you guys can kind of get the ball rolling if you're sort of interested, and to hear another state say the same thing a different way in their experience. I just really appreciate everyone listening. Sarah, I appreciate you being here and giving me your time so generously. And I can't wait to check back in a year.
Sounds great. Thank you.
I hope you loved that episode as much as I did. Something to really help the show is to forward this episode right now to another CAA colleague or another AA student in your life and tell them why you loved the episode and why you think they would love it. That really helps take this message far and wide into our CAA community. Of course, doing all the other things like following me on Instagram at Awakened Anesthetist. That's where I show a lot more behind the scenes. You can join my email newsletter. You'll find a link for that in the show notes. And of course, you can leave a rating and review for this podcast on whatever app you're listening to me right now. Thank you all so much for being here. This community means so much to me. And I hope you're all out there taking small steps towards living your own life by design. Let's talk soon. Yay! Okay. I'm going to press stop recording.